Okay, well, let's just start. So for anybody here, there's a QR code. It will also be at the end too, but we are going to put it in the chat, like the actual link that is put to the QR code. And what it does, it will give you this presentation, like a view only of the presentation, but there are a lot of resources and links that Arielle and I have put in here um, for you to access and work on. So first, we're going to introduce ourselves. So this is building and maintaining an inclusive school culture, which we're going to get all into all the nitty gritty of it. I'm Kayla. I have been in education since 2010. I was a para, a special ed teacher, an education consultant, and now I moved out of California and couldn't bring my job with me. So I'm in Washington, if anybody is in Washington.
There
You
was someone in
probably,
Washington at my last session, Kayla. So
there was?
yeah, there was. And I was thinking
Good.
about you. Yeah.
Represent, you guys. And so then when I moved here, I was like, I'm just gonna be a stay-at-home parent with my two small kids and did not want to do that. And so then I started doing inclusion consulting, met Arielle and Molly. Molly is not here today, but she's also amazing. Um, and I met Arielle. So Arielle,
All right.
I need to introduce you.
Thanks, Kayla. We're excited to present this. This is actually our first time we're going to be presenting together and presenting this. And this is going to take us into going to the TASH conference and doing a workshop about this in December. So if anyone's going to New Orleans to TASH, we'd love to have you at our full workshop about this. But I am an inclusive education consultant. I'm based out of Los Angeles. And I have been in the education space for over 12 years here. Previously, I lived in New Jersey. And so a lot of what I believe about inclusion stems from, experiencing special ed in a different way in New Jersey. And also, both as a student, is how I was seeing it. And then as a practitioner during my student teaching, and then moving out to California, the innovative state of California that has not innovated public education. So I work with schools, districts, and families to help expand inclusive practices for our students, primarily students with intellectual disabilities who traditionally aren't included, but also my work as a teacher was always with mild to moderate population. So it's, you know, I think, why not go all out when we're talking about inclusion, make sure we're including everyone. And yeah, Kayla and I met actually at a conference in Pasadena at Club 21, where we were both presenting about inclusion in the Down syndrome community. So I'm so happy I met you, Kayla, and thanks for being here with me today. So this is a worksheet that we made. It's linked here, and you can feel free. We have some prompts and reflection questions throughout that we've embedded. So if this is helpful to use to organize your thoughts and answers, please feel free to click it to access that. You can type into it, print it quickly, or just know it's there for when you're reviewing the slides later. But, just so you know, we do have some points of reflection. So just make sure to have whatever you need in order to engage with that, whether it's, a pad of Post-it notes, a pen. Um, yeah, that'll be fun.
And it's multiple pages. I think you did such a good job on that, Arielle. Just had to have to say it
Thank
was
you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay. So what is culture? I'm just going to read this because when people present and then they don't read what's on their page, I get really frustrated. So personal thing, so I'm just going to do it. Culture is the collective values, beliefs, traditions, behaviors, and social norms that shape the environment and experiences of students, staff, and the wider community. It encompasses the way people interact, the school's approach to teaching and learning, expectations for behavior, the level of inclusiveness, and how success is defined and celebrated. Overall, a school's culture May I see the first slide? Thanks. Yes, I will in just a second. Sorry. Overall, a school's culture significantly influences students' engagement, academic achievement, well-being, and sense of belonging. That is a very big definition of culture. I'm sure we could have put it in one sentence, but what we really want you to see here is that like culture is huge, and it's something like we all have even our own cultures that like are at our house, and then we are all coming to school or to work, and we're trying to find this balance where we can all get along, all have similar values and goals, where we are hopefully increasing inclusive practices. Um, and that really is something that is like so internally ingrained in us. And we're going to talk about through this presentation um, how we can start changing people's minds and having these conversations and just the importance of it. Okay, so I hope you were able to get that QR code.
I, while you're there, I'm just thinking too about how nuanced it is, because even when we think about like school culture, like I saw we have some OTs, BSCBAs, myself as a former special ed teacher, you're working with so many different classrooms. So then it's like, and then the classroom culture or that grade levels culture. And it's just goes on and on. And sometimes when we're thinking about expanding inclusive practices, like that is like dizzying when we're thinking about how many different spaces and conversations that might involve. So we're hoping we could break this into something more manageable for you today.
Yeah, that was a great way to break that down. Okay, pretty sure this was me. Okay, so how is your school's culture? So right now, we just want you to reflect um, if like what would students, staff, and families see, hear, and feel at your school now? So we're just gonna give you like 30 seconds um, to write some stuff down. I did not put on a timer or anything.
I actually love this question, Kayla, because there's that like tiny, tiny shift from part one to part two of like what is it and what would you want it to be? And I think that's a
Yes.
really that's gonna like identify that like that pivotal piece that we're gonna zoom in more on today. All right. So that is in your notebook as well. But yeah, let's move on, Kayla, and then people can come back and add more thoughts to this one as well as we continue.
Okay. Well, if you also want to, so we only talked about the first question. If you also want to
Oh,
talk about the second question,
oh.
the first one is what would they see if they came to your school? The second one is what do you want them to see when and hear and feel when they come to your school?
I also find too, like that second one, maybe closing your eyes and visualizing it. Like, what is that ideal feeling, or what does that ideally look like? Or sketching a picture of that can be helpful too. Okay, so a lot of what we're going to share with you today is based in Edgar Schein's cultural model. And he describes the model kind of as an iceberg. He is a organizational psychologist with MIT. And the way that he looks at building organizational culture is you know, just in organizations as a whole. It's not specific to schools, but we both feel really passionately that there are a lot of really great tools, philosophies, frameworks that exist outside of the education space that kind of get stuck outside the education space. And we're constantly like reinventing the wheel in public education sometimes and making our own tools when there are some really great ones that exist. So we're hoping to shed some light on this one. The image that you have is also clickable. So it's going to connect you to a LinkedIn article that describes this more. But real quick, I just want to go over the iceberg with you. So he breaks, you know, culture into three components. the artifacts that represent the culture, the values that are part of it, and the assumptions that kind of are the deepest part of it. So when we're working through this step, we're going to start at the above the surface area of artifacts, because those are the things that, might be most obvious when you walk into the school. Or in the last question, what do people see? What do they hear? Like those are going to be that type of evidence. And then we're going to gradually go a little deeper to encourage you to figure out, okay, what is going on at the deepest point of that iceberg that we really need to be warming up to help that part melt and create the change that we want. All right. So, as I said, the first piece that we're going to talk about is the artifacts and practices. And this is, as I mentioned, what is easiest to see. If you pulled up the worksheet, you also have a graphic organizer with a iceberg. So feel free to use that or draw your own, or take notes in whatever way works best for you. But examples of artifacts that we could think about when we're thinking about culture and its relation to inclusion might be the inclusive practices that are noticeably being done at your school site. So, um, could it be different strategies that are happening, different curriculums, um, different ways people are scheduled, maybe the service delivery models that are being used. Some of these things can overlap when we go deeper into values too, depending on kind of how intensely we're thinking about them. But this is just kind of like that bird's eye view, right? Maybe shared responsibilities in IEP meetings, awards for academic achievement, um, any kind of inclusive classroom displays, co-teaching practices. Is also thinking maybe your scheduling matrix at school or the daily schedule. Those are all artifacts. So what visible practices or structures in your school either promote or limit inclusion? Let's take a couple seconds to just jot down what that looks like for you.
And while people are thinking, this was part of the conversation I just had in my last session of also having disabled advocates or heroes, or people to look up to. What do you call those? Like mentors on your walls. We celebrate a lot of people in schools and teach them about a lot of historical figures. There are also disabled historical figures that could be on your walls and being learned about. Um, and what a great way to like have representation in your classroom. Or like having books with disability representation, obviously, is my favorite one. I love reading. Um, so if anybody has other ideas that they want to put into the chat, it's opened.
And if any of these ideas are resonating, just jot them down, because there is a part later on where we're going to kind of take our current state and we're going to work on how can we bridge that with our desired state. And some of these things that Kayla's naming would be really awesome kind of maybe next steps for maybe the lack of what you're seeing.
I love Angelina just put in the comments, we're doing a neurodiversity book club for staff. I absolutely love that. Weekly newsletters for staff, and we have monthly presenters for students and staff.
Oh,
So
wow. That's
what
so exciting.
what great like examples of inclusive artifacts to have at your school site.
Yeah.
So, okay,
All right.
keep it going.
Um, so here are some artifacts and practices as Kayla started us out. Having inclusive books in the classroom, the library, the office with a variety of disability representation, cultural representation, and family representation. Also celebrating days or months like Down Syndrome Awareness Month in October, Autism Acceptance Month in April, or whatever holiday disabilities and cultures are represented from your school. Um, There's also Inclusive Schools Week in December. I should have added that one. Sorry that I missed that. That's important. Focusing on learning activities, including disabled advocates, people of color, and other minority groups. Students need to learn about the wide range of people that are out there and how to celebrate our differences. I also, in my last session, we did a lot about our personal exploration and exploring the way our own brains work in order to make connection with how our students might be experiencing things. And I think too, like a really great practice is like modeling your, if I am neurodivergent, so, being, open to the greatest extent that feels comfortable for you about, the things that are challenges to you, whether, you're neurodivergent or not, and how you go about things as well, because while these um, mentors in the community and celebrities with disabilities are all really important, I think our kids really are also inspired by the people that are closest to them and how they experience the world. So let's go ahead and write down 2 practices that you might want to bring back to your school site. And again, you can continue to share things in the chat if you have other things too.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know I would, oh yeah, there's more.
Sorry. There's more.
Okay.
Abilities Acceptance Week or Disability Awareness Week. We have different
Mhm.
stations with various communication options and building fidgets. With
Oh, thank you so much for bringing up the fidgets too. I think the best way to introduce fidgets, some people, ask about that or concerned about introducing them, using them, modeling using them, right? Actually, don't have one near me, but I think Kayla and I were talking the other day and I was like pulling apart my little stretchy ball, normalizing all of these things, right?
Yeah, I was looking to see if I
Hmm.
had too. I feel like
Yeah. Well, oh,
whenever
I
we're
have
in
my
person,
timer here,
whenever we're in person, Arielle always
normalizing our
needs to
time timer. I
to,
know for my in-person workshops, I like to load everyone up on fidgets to take home and take to school.
oh,
I always say
okay.
we're fidget friendly.
Yes. Okay, next, we're going to talk about the values. So this is like the first portion under the water of the iceberg. And values is the organization's shared beliefs and values. And a great way that you could really kind of hold your school accountable for their beliefs and values is going over their mission. And if you know what your school's mission is, this is something that I actually got to work on at one of my old schools because they wanted to update the mission statement. And I thought it was a really interesting process that we went through to do it. And so I kind of just wanted to share it with you because I feel, when parents are looking to like go to a school for their child, the first thing they usually see is a mission statement on websites or on the school website. There's going to be, what is the mission of the school? And that is definitely the expectation that everyone now has for that school. So, um, recognizing what your school's mission is and thinking if the practices go with it, is really important. And then what can you do if the mission does need to be reworded, which it just gets reworded, the principal has to, I'm pretty sure it's just like the principal has to go to the district and like change it. But when we did it at my school, it was a collaborative thing that we did. So the school mission that is on the bottom of this page, if you click there, it will just show you a handout. I think it's 2 pages of just minor steps on how to go about rewording your school mission. Um, and it can really be, like getting a group of like inviting everyone, and then whoever wants to attend can attend. Brainstorming together what you feel like the values are at your school. And then just like kind of breaking that down into what's the most important. How are we going to put it like in the mission, reading over other schools' missions to get ideas of like how you want to word yours, is another thing that we did. And then we did not want the goal to be that the mission was going to be done after one meeting. We wanted to have these conversations and talk about our values and our beliefs for the school. And then we wanted to leave and kind of all think about it on our own, go back and work the next day at school and be like, do we feel like this is our value? Like, what is important here? And what's important in our community? Um, so being able to reflect is also really important. And inclusive practices, that is a beautiful word that should be added to your mission. So if it's not in your mission, go at it. And then what you can do if you feel like your mission is not being practiced at your school, thinking about certain actionable steps would be like advocating for specific training. If you don't feel like teachers know how to support students with disabilities, um, what kind of trainings are out there that we can get? What kind of policies should we have as a school that everyone should be following? What sort of professional developments are there? Um, so many ways to really start this conversation going.
I'm also thinking about too, saw someone present about just, the amount of initiatives that all schools have and all the things that are always like the competing priorities. And like, okay, if we're struggling to make inclusion the priority of the year, how can we embed inclusion and inclusive practices into the other initiatives that for whatever reason are feeling like they're taking precedent? So, even if it's implementing, a new curriculum, a lot of districts are always in the process of doing that. How can we incorporate, prioritizing access for different students to the curriculum? What does that look like? You know, is there an opportunity to teach our colleagues how to use like Google Chrome extensions and different tools that can help increase access? So I think there's a lot of places that we can embed inclusion that a lot of the times when we're looking at like, how do we start it? Like sometimes we're like taking on this, like, we have to change everything at once, but there are a lot of things that are happening and a lot of like great values and like practices that are in place that could be made even better by adding that inclusive lens instead of trashing everything at the same time, which I don't recommend.
No, I think that's great. I think that's such a good suggestion of, yeah, like why reinvent the wheel? Why not just, perfect the wheel that you have? Make
Right.
it.
I've seen schools that are, working to dive deep into their data analysis, but maybe they're not like pulling out, the students with IEP subgroup. And sometimes as an inclusionist, I don't want everyone pulled out. I'm like, no, they're part of everyone else, right? But sometimes if we really need to see like what's happening and why is that happening, it's really powerful.
Uh-oh. Did I freeze or did Arielle freeze? Oh, it looked like Arielle froze. Okay, well, I'm gonna keep going and hopefully we met yesterday and her internet gave out on her. Oh, there she is. You
Oh
froze for a sec,
no.
but you're back.
Okay.
Um, Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the practices that you can do for implementing these values. So really making sure the school's mission is inclusive. And if you don't know what your school's mission is, Google is your friend. It should be on your school website. That is something that, and if it's not, it should be on your district's website. Like that should be up there. And then if you do feel like it needs to be reworded or if it needs inclusive practices should be included in the wording, talk to your school's principal. That is really where this conversation starts. So that is a great way to start that. Um, Talk to your administrator or district about what professional developments are planned for the year. There is usually a budget to send teachers to trainings too, like the Inclusion Collaborative Conference. Um, there are so many budgets for schools, and like money is allocated to a place where like it can't be used anywhere else. So there is, I mean, I know every year as a teacher, they would, and it wasn't always a priority to schools because, if they're sending you to professional development during the workday, you might be missing some work. But how else are we going to like educate and get better on these topics if we also don't make our learning a priority? And so this is a great way. And even like finding a conference that like a group of teachers could go to. I know I did that one of my elementary school teaching years, and it was great because it brought the five of us. It was like one teacher from every grade went, and and the principal. And it was just such a good way for us to have these conversations. Like we would all go to presentations and then we all got to come back and be like, okay, this is what we learned. And then we came back to our school, and every staff meeting for the next like 5 staff meetings, we would have the first 15 minutes be something that we learned and something that we should bring back to our school. And that was something, I mean, we had a phenomenal principal, but this was something that like really didn't take up any extra time, but it brought so much more of like the collaborative practice between staff members to our school, which was so great. And then being specific about inclusive practices. Does your school know what inclusion looks like? What like actionable steps do you need to take? At your school, really knowing like what is happening now, because every school is at a different place of inclusion, of inclusive practices. So it's like, are your students kind of just in the room but not actually making genuine peer relationships or like actively learning the curriculum? Or are your students still in a special ed classroom the whole day? I mean, do you have teachers who like are asking questions about inclusive practices, or do you have teachers who are saying, no, they're not going to do that? Um, so knowing where you are and then figuring out the next step is really important. And we do have a worksheet, of course, for you to, well, that was the worksheet at the beginning, but we also have a practice in a little bit talking more about that too. So breaking it down to the core, the assumptions, people's underlying beliefs and
So
biases.
we're at like the total bottom of that iceberg
Yeah,
now,
okay, we
right,
are.
Kayla?
Yes, we are. I I kind of
That
forgot. I
visual.
was so invested in the last slide. Um, so yes, this is the bottom of the iceberg. Now this
It's
is like,
dark down there. It's hard to see, it's cold. We don't even want to be there. It's like uncomfortable, right?
yes, and it's different. We all have our biases and our beliefs and like our personal experiences that are being held on in such a deep down to our core that we might not even know the biases we have until someone points it out. Um, and that is the hardest part to change when talking to people. And I can tell you right now, going and telling them that the fact is that, there has been no study that shows inclusive practices have has been like detrimental to students. All studies, every study that has ever been done on inclusive practices, either there is no change in the students learning or there is increase, like they have improved. The students without disabilities have like improved more than they thought they would. So there's literally no negative thing about if inclusive practices is done right with training, with the support, um, it is positive for everybody. But if you say that to people, that means nothing to them because they have something so deep inside of them that is making them afraid of this change. And that's kind of what we have to see. Do you have an example of written vision mission that successfully includes? That is a great question. We haven't even did. I'm sure my old school, I should show that one. I will add a mission statement to this slide. So make sure to keep that QR code, and I will add an example of a mission statement that has some good language. That is a great question. Um,
I
okay,
also wanted
so
to add here,
yeah,
do you mind, Kayla?
no,
That I think that the more that, for me, like I'm someone who is, late diagnosed as having ADHD, and that was, a diagnosis that happened during COVID that really, really, really looked like anxiety. And then I had a great doctor who was able to advocate, to look further into that for me. But I think like coming from that place and just, also my husband, he has ADHD, but he was identified earlier. So like just the differences and how that like affects, how we decide to raise our little guy, like for me, maybe I have beliefs that are based on like, what it was like to mask my needs. And for him, like maybe he was, over identified in a way. And like, he was always shamed about disability in the general education class, right? Because he was always being called out for being impulsive. And so maybe that, makes him believe this is hypothetical that, inclusion's not the right place because he was so hurt when he was in an inclusion setting and had those needs. So there's a lot of like really personal things. And it's really like it's really interesting to figure it out. But I find that, this does take a deep relationship with someone, it's especially that person who is going to be like that most resistant person and everyone knows that person at their school. There's and there is more that meets the surface, right? Or meets the eye. There it might have to do with a niece or nephew who has a disability in a different state and what their schooling experience is, might have nothing to do with them and their teaching practice in your school. So yeah, I encourage everyone to really find those people to dig with there.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a great add-on. Um, and so going on to other things that are like deeply embedded into the school, is, focusing on like how students learn best, student potential, discipline and behavior, role of the teachers and parents, inclusion and diversity, and is change necessary or desired. Um, with all of these, you could probably catch people's like underlying biases or ableism on like the language they use throughout the day. I mean, and again, it's a lot of those mindset shifts. I remember I was working with this school and I was working with all the kindergarten teachers, and they were looking through all this, like writing samples. We were going over a specific curriculum stuff, and the school was all the students with disabilities. They were all in general ed classrooms. And they were going over different worksheets, and it was just very negative. And they were kindergarten teachers, and they were like, oh yeah, well, I mean, this one, they barely write on the paper. I have to give them visuals. Like everything was very negative about how they communicated about the writing. And then when we were getting towards the end of it, I asked if a lot of these kids were in preschool or if they were having any sort of learning environment before kindergarten. And the teachers were like, oh, well, I mean, no, like a lot of them didn't have preschool and they were coming just from like moms that were working and dads that were working. Um, and so I was like, oh, well, okay. So it looks like they knew nothing about writing at the beginning of the year. And now they're writing 2 words. Like that's not a negative thing, that's a positive thing. And even saying that, I mean, it kind of did call them out on it, but it's kind of hard, I think, when it's so easy to be like, oh, well, this needs to improve, this needs to improve, instead of looking back at like what has improved, and calling out these like, biases in people. I didn't say anything about them being rude. I wasn't like, wow, you guys are bad teachers. Like, no, I was like, if anything, I was complimenting them. I'm like, you guys are great teachers. Look at
Mhm.
how much you've accomplished this year, and you still have like 2 or 3 more months to go. Um, and sometimes you just need that like positive language to remind people how much they're doing. Because, teaching, and just being in the education system, it's stressful. And I know people are having a hard time like after COVID and coming back, and people I know are blaming, the 2 years off, and kids are, I don't know, going wild now. And I'm like, okay, then we're going to adapt and change. Like this is something we've all done, and we're going to go through it together and keep supporting each other however we can. Back to you.
I yeah, I love that though. I love how that you just shifted that like calling out to positive reinforcement. And I think that what I hear from teachers a lot is like, I wasn't trained to be a special ed teacher. I'm not the right person for this. And like, um, I've taken that previously as like, I don't want to do the work. They don't want to do the work. And again, like that's not going deep enough to figure it out. But a lot of people genuinely feel insecure in their skill sets around serving kids with complex needs. And I mean, I guess sometimes I do too, because every kid is different. Every kid has unique needs. Like when I like go into a classroom, and observe a certain student for the first time, like I'm still, pulling from my tool bag of things, but I don't know exactly what's going to work for that kid, and like normalizing that too, that there are strategies in their toolbox that have been effective previously, and that um there are improvements that are happening, even, maybe unintentionally, right? So, but other ways that we can also help kind of navigate some of these assumptions can lead by example, use appropriate language, educate our peers and students about appropriate accommodations and disabilities. Um, Again, I think modeling is just so powerful. Celebrate differences, show how inclusive practices benefit everyone. I also love connecting, again, like what's happening in our classroom to like other contexts outside the classroom. So, if we're talking about, accessibility, having conversations about our cell phones, what accessibility features do you use? Do you even know why that was like put on there? Do you have any Chrome, extensions that you use to help you stay organized? There's so many things that people are doing to accommodate themselves and their own needs outside of school and inside school as adults, but we don't really see that connection to our students oftentimes. Sharing news articles, YouTube videos, podcasts, highlighting that highlight inclusive practices. I love the prevalence of podcasts. There's so many great ones for this, and everyone has the drive to work, right? Sharing disabled advocate stories, talking about ableism and even disability, thing. Um, have a tough
CORN,
conversation.
like maybe if we spell it. That's just what it's called. Does everybody know what that is? I guess maybe I'll just say what it is so no one has to say it. So what it is that like if a person with Down syndrome becomes or like gets asked out to prom, and then there's a whole news article about the non-disabled person asking out the disabled person to prom and like how amazing that non-disabled person is for doing that. Like, wow, what a great heart that that person has, because that is a lot of ableism of like, they're just going to prom. How about we don't make it a thing about them having a disability or not having a disability, and that they're friends who want to go to prom together. Um, and so just really like, and when I say like talking about this, because there are a lot of articles of celebrating, a person with a disability doing something. If they're doing something like that, there would be a news article about anybody like starting their own shirt company that, whatever. That's one thing. But saying like, wow, this disabled person went to the grocery store and got groceries, like how amazing. That would be a disability PORN. I don't know if we're allowed to say that or not. It's just what it's called.
Thank
Okay.
you. That was really great, Kayla. Um, and having tough conversations, talking to people about problem statements like, inclusion will hurt the learning of the other kids or waste their time, etc. Or terms like normal kids or I hate IEP kids, be so angry, or the normal classroom. So go ahead and write a couple things down that we've talked about that maybe you will bring back to your school site. And I just want to acknowledge that we have a question from Angelina as well about just the structural, definitely not just, the really challenging structural barriers that limit kind of the ability to implement some of these things that are coming outside of the school site, such as class sizes and, um, other things. I know sometimes like this can come from the district. Sometimes it can come from the teachers union. There's a lot of things. Something that I remind people now is, I come from a place where I have been the one who dissolves the special day class and gets those kids in there and figures it out and, but also I think it's important to remember that all of our classrooms are already inclusive, whether we've dissolved the special day class or not. Except the special day classes, they're not inclusive. But and what I mean by that is that in California, most of our RSP students are distributed throughout all of the classroom, and those kids have documented disabilities and needs. And there's something that's like, I don't know why, like it's often not registered that like to the teachers who might be having challenges with this, like you already have students with disabilities in your classroom. But because they're like RSP students, I think like sometimes they're just thought of differently, and I could go on about that. But so I really like to just like start by helping teachers help their RSP students and do a better job of that instead of just relying on like sending them to the resource room, right? And I like to do that a lot by bringing universal design for learning practices into the classroom, because I think once that some of those things are in place, then the idea of having more students or more furniture, maybe you don't even need more furniture in the classroom if you now have flexible seating in your class, or just kind of like changing that paradigm of like how classroom instruction and the class culture works, so that it's easier to see how other students can continue fitting into that. That makes sense. But
And
these
I think
barriers at
also
the larger level
we
are
so we
really upsetting.
we do have to
Hmm.
go a little quicker because we have like 30 minutes left. But I also just want to add that I think something that has helped me with my mindset with this is that like education has always not been fully staffed. Like this has always been a problem with educators of like getting enough teachers and resources. And so like really trying to find some creative way. Like, yeah, you don't want a student sitting at a desk where there's all these papers, but like, maybe they can come in when like, I don't know, people are sitting at the floor, they move desks like everyone gets to, or, trying to think of creative ways. Um, you could reach out to me or Arielle afterwards, and we can totally talk more one-on-one with you about specific things. Uh, Universal design of learning, we will have to get to that at the end if we have time, because we definitely have more of this presentation that we are going to get through. If you want to
Yeah,
try to
yeah,
incorporate
please,
it while
please
you
reach
talk,
out to us.
just
Please reach out to
about
us. That
halfway.
is something, yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
So we're gonna wrap up this section with the iceberg by thinking of something you believe to your core. So you're gonna think about what is something that you believe to your core, and what would someone need to say to change your mind? Okay, so this is a two-part challenge to you. Um, and an example that comes to mind for me is something I believe to my core is that um, all classroom behavior has underlying sensory or medical related roots to it. And to change my beliefs on that, I think I would need to see current research from multiple sources. Anyway, so
Would
current,
you have
yeah.
to trust the sources though?
They would need to be like, from like
Reputable.
top education research universities. Yeah.
I love that.
Hmm.
Thank you for the well, so next
Hmm.
we are going to actually talk about these two books that I think are a great way, or they're just like great to read that go over um, really how to change people's minds. And not in like a negative, like cult-like way. Like you're not, well, kind of. I was actually talking to someone about how I wish I could make inclusive practices more of a cult just so everyone would start doing it. So I feel like it'd be a good cult if there's such a thing. So changing minds. So understanding where others are coming from, like what we talked about with the core beliefs, really like asking questions and having these conversations with people. Because if everyone's just screaming facts at each other, no one's listening. And if someone were to come up to you and be like, no, behavior is not that. Let me tell you what it is. Like already, I would feel like my walls are going up. Like I'm not ready to listen to someone who's coming in hot to attack my beliefs. Because that's like who you are. So it's like hard to, really reflect and like change some really core beliefs about yourself. Um, not telling them that they're wrong and yelling the facts at them, like I just said. Uh, and then practicing active listening. So, this book, You're Not Listening, is such a good book that really had me reflecting on what active listening is. And I'm sure how many people have had that moment where you're like, hi, I'm Kayla. What's your name? You're like, oh, I love that name. And then you're like, I'm sorry, what's your name again? Like, I just totally missed that because a lot of times people are like trying to actively prepare like what they're going to say next. Of like, oh, do I like your shirt? Do I like what am I going to say next that this isn't like an awkward conversation? Where if you are actively listening and, they say their name and then you're like, oh, like Max, that's so funny. I know a person named whatever. Like then you are having a more genuine conversation by actively listening to each other. And also pauses are allowed to happen. I know people get really awkward when there's or it's called an awkward pause. Um, but that's fine. We don't need to be moving as fast as apparently the world tells us to. But You Are Not Listening, great book about active listening. And then the book Think Again by Adam Grant. Oh, Kate Murphy's the other one by Adam Grant. I am a huge Adam Grant fangirl. He's also an organizational scientist, right? Is that what it is? Um,
An organizational psychologist, I think.
Psychologist, thank you.
Yeah.
He is he makes my brain like explode all the time. So Think Again, he has a chapter about how this doctor was talking to a lot of anti-vaxxer parents, and this doctor was like known to change their minds. But the doctor, it would be a sit-down conversation. They would be talking about, what the parents' concerns are and the doctor's medical experience. And they would talk about it and they would always leave the conversation in a positive, respectful way, where the doctor would be like, well, you have the questions that you had, I've answered them. You are a parent and I know that like you're able to make the right choices for your family. And like giving that respect to someone will make it so much easier for them to be open to changing their mind. Because again, also who changes their mind and then their friend is like, I told you you like this one better. Like nobody likes those kinds of conversations. So instead of trying to be right or prove someone else wrong, we could all just like communicate and learn from each other, which is so much better, in my opinion. Okay, so we're just going to go over some quick true or false culture statements. I'm just going to read them, and then in the chat, you are going to say if it's true or false. And these are all culture statements. First one, cultural norms influence communication styles across different societies. Is that true or false? And after I see like 4 or 5, I will just, it is true. Everybody is right. Beautiful.
That's
Okay,
7
next
true.
one. The next one. Culture remains unchanged over time. Oh my gosh, beautiful. That is false. Culture changes. Everything changes. Isn't that like a
But
change?
what if that's the way we've always done it, Kayla? Isn't it supposed to stay that way?
Oh my
Or
gosh.
schools say?
Oh my
With special
gosh,
ed,
Ari,
that's how
yeah.
we used to do it, right?
I hear that so often from teachers. This is how I've always taught. Well, then that's a great reason why it needs to change because you should not always be teaching the same. Oh my gosh, Arielle. Perfect. Perfect
I
example.
know, I just real quick too, like I'm sure other people have heard this or compared this, like with the medical, doctors in the medical, I don't want to say industry, but would you go to a doctor that tells you this is how they've always done it and they haven't changed their practice and the way that it does work when there's like obviously new research and professional learning and all these other things
Oh
they
my God.
would they should be accessing. No, you would never go. You'd probably report them to like a medical board, right? So why is that okay in our classrooms?
I love that. That is
Yeah.
phenomenal. Okay, we only have a few
Thanks,
more.
Paul.
Cultural diversity can enhance creativity and innovation in a workplace. Correct. It is true. Language is one of the key components of cultural identity. Beautiful. I'm not trying to trick anyone, just a heads up. Well, never mind. I never like those quizzes that are like, I feel like I'm trying to be tricked. Only formal education can transmit culture to the next generation. True or false? That is false. Beautiful. Last one, cultural identity is determined solely by geographic location. Oh my gosh. You guys are cultural experts.
All right. So thank you, Kayla. That was wonderful. I also just love the connection, connecting school and organizational culture, to the broader conversation of culture and like making sure that we're looking through that broader lens ourselves and then with those we work with, right? But I mentioned this earlier when we started that there's a place where we're going to look at our barriers that we're facing and see if we can find some bridges to help us get to the other side of those barriers. So, what barriers can you picture having to face?
Sorry.
That's
Is it
okay.
too soon?
Maybe, no, it's okay. Maybe there are things that are, at any point of your iceberg, right? So, if some of those really low ones that are in that assumptions, really deep ones, maybe if that feels really heavy and scary to you right now, what are some of the um, barriers that are higher up and that are closer to the surface that maybe there are some bridges for that feel accessible and that you could start building sooner, right? So there is a chart in your workbook for this, but this is a modified version of a barrier to bridges protocol. So you can actually look that up as well if you wanted to do like a full interactive version with your staff. It's called the barrier to bridges protocol, and I will try and find that link to that as well and put that in the chat in just a moment. But for an example, a barrier might be that general ed teachers feel like they don't know enough about inclusive practices, type bridge, you know, advocate, implement, figure out how to provide UDL training or coaching for your teachers. Another barrier that I see with this school that I work with right now is that their schedule, the way that they schedule their week is not aligned with their values. And they value a lot of collaboration, but their teachers don't have collaborative planning built into their week or an opportunity to co-plan, right? So that's a barrier that they don't have a structured time during the school day to collaborate the teachers who need to. And a bridge would be next semester, seeing how we can revise some of the periods to ensure that the teachers can get together within the school day. So let's take about a minute and just jot down anything that you're thinking about, what a barrier could be and the bridge to get you over it. If you have the worksheet, there's a little cute bridge visual. Um, But yeah, no one wants to be like off on an island themselves. How can you cross back into the mainland? Or if you don't like how the mainland is because it's failing to change, how can you make a bridge to cross everyone else over to your island. If anyone
Okay.
has anything that they want to put in the chat, go ahead.
We are going to keep going because I really want us to go over the key concepts to changing schools culture. Um, because we only have 15 minutes left. So we are going to go over these with some examples as quickly as we can. If you go, also, as you see here, there's a link to an article that also goes over all this, but we are going to go over it quickly right now.
Okay, so this is also based in research and things that are done in outside organizations outside of schools. Um, Key concepts to changing school culture. The first one is cultural change is evolutionary, not revolutionary. And an example is that culture change is a slow process and it requires people to unlearn deep-seated assumptions and adopt new values and behaviors. So it's going to be really gradual. The second idea is that leadership is essential to cultivate change. Leaders must actively guide the change process by aligning behaviors with new cultural goals, promoting new values, and addressing resistance. Okay, so really getting those people on board with you and finding those connections to pull them in. And then three, psychological safety is necessary for change. This one is big. A lot of organizational psychologists talk about this one. And if you're thinking about too, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that is towards the bottom, that psychological safety, or oh, yes, physiological and psychological. Okay. So for people to unlearn old assumptions and adopt new ones, they need psychological safety, a sense that making mistakes and learning new ways of working won't result in punishment or failure. And so this really takes us into growth culture mindset that Kayla is gonna speak more about in just a moment.
Yes. So some examples to do those other values. One, verbal affirmations. I totally do this all the time, even with my kids at my house. But giving myself verbal affirmations of like, one day at a time, or like they're learning, like what can I do to help this situation? Like things to verbally remind myself how to support my students better or my kids better. Uh, Leadership is essential to culture change. If your leader focused on supporting all students, could you lead that change? Which you definitely could. We know you can. And then the next thing is I'm going to talk about the growth culture mindset versus the genius culture mindset. Now, this is a book I'm reading right now called The Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy. And she talks about this in the workplace, but I think this is also something that is very, very much happens at school as well. Well, I mean, school is also work for people. So, this is one of the pictures she has in her book. Well, it says growth mindset and fixed mindset. In the book, it's a lot of like growth culture mindset and genius culture mindset. So for growth, it says I can learn anything I want to. When I'm frustrated, I persevere. I want to challenge myself. When I fail, I learn. Tell me I try hard. If you succeed, I'm inspired. My effort and attitude determine everything. And so the growth culture mindset is all about like, I tried something new, it didn't work. What can I learn from it? And then where can I go from this? Where the fixed mindset, I'm either good at it or I'm not. When I'm frustrated, I give up. I don't like to be challenged. When I fail, I'm no good. Tell me I'm smart. If you succeed, I feel threatened. My abilities determine everything. Now, the genius culture mindset is all about, how can we outperform each other? Like, if you came in and someone was like, oh, where'd you go to school? And you said, Yale. And they're like, oh, okay, that's impressive. Like, instead, like making that a part of like some sort of competitiveness between staff members or something. Because when we have a growth culture mindset, people are willing to take more chances and mess up because if you're going to get in trouble for messing up or if someone's going to make you feel bad for messing up, then you're not going to want to push and like try something new. But what we have learned is that we are always changing and we always need to like renovate or figure out something new to succeed with what I can't remember where that sentence was going. I kind of lost my train of thought. Okay, so here are some other examples. The genius culture mindset is the little light bulb, and the growth culture mindset is the leaf. So genius would be only focusing on results. Growth would be focusing on both the results and the process. Genius would be emphasizes employees' talents and successes. Growth would be emphasizes employees' motivation and effective effort. Genius is a single-minded focus on the best instinct, best ideas, best people, where growth is a focus on performance alongside learning, creativity, and innovation. There was actually a study done for children and about what language to use when they succeed at something. And so, like, for example, they're trying to get a ball into a basketball hoop, and they keep trying and they keep messing up. And every time they don't get it in the hoop, you're like, oh, that sucks, try again. Oh, what a bummer. Like, you're so close. And then they get it in the hoop and you're like, yay, you did it. And then that was what got celebrated. Where instead, that would be like the genius culture mindset, where instead you should focus on the growth and afterwards be like, wow, you tried so hard. And even though you missed it at like, maybe you missed it so many times, but you just kept working. And I love that, like, you were so persistent and wanted to keep going. Like, focusing on their hard work and the process is so much more for a child compared to just completing the goal, which obviously is the same as adults. And this is something my partner and I have changed with our kids, and you can already tell the difference of how much they want to try harder on something and mess up and try again because they know that that's the process that they're enjoying, not like the finishing product.
I
Less than
love
the
that
last four.
connection. Yeah, I love that connection because we've all talked about growth and fixed mindset, with our, in the concept of students over time. And so really expanding that to like, and our colleagues and the culture overall. I think that's really powerful. Here are a couple more key concepts for changing school culture that we just wanted to make sure that we included. So building off our last list, the fourth concept is going to be to identify and change deeply held assumptions. Sheen's model emphasizes that the hardest part of cultural change is surfacing and shifting the unconscious assumptions that drive behavior. Okay. And there, again, that is linked. There's a whole article linked when you click on that iceberg piece. The fifth concept is creating small wins and build momentum. Sheen suggests starting with small changes to build trust and momentum, which help reduce resistance and increase buy-in. And six, manage resistance. Leaders and change agents need to listen to concerns and engage people in meaningful dialogue to address their fears. And we have one more. The seventh and final concept for changing school cultures that we want you to walk away with is embedding new practices in the culture. New value and practices need to become institutionalized through policies, procedures, and social norms and your mission, right? This includes regular reflections, ongoing professional development, and feedback loops to ensure that the new culture continues to evolve. And something Kayla and I were speaking about when we were connecting about this is just that culture is not something that we ever arrive on. Inclusion isn't something that we're going to suddenly arrive at. There are always going to be places to iterate and continue improving and continue evolving. And it is, just like with our doctors, like we don't want them to stop once they, get the highest mark in their, med school class. Like we need them to keep evolving, and our schools need to be constantly iterating in these ways too. Kayla, did you have anything to add to that piece?
Yes, just the checking in, especially when you're like, you might not always be the person in the classroom when your students are in other classrooms. So finding times to like check in with teachers. I did try to do like emails. I try to like give them handouts of just being like, tell me how it's going. But really the best thing that worked for me was actually talking to them, even if it was going into their classroom at the end of the day and just being like, hey, how'd it go today? Anything I can help you with? So then it kind of, you know, I could try to help them more and we could keep building our that trusted relationship. This is one more resource for you guys. If you click this, I'm pretty sure it brings you to a worksheet that looks like this. This is an action plan that I used to use as an education consultant, and it was just a great way to really have clear expectations of like who's accountable for what. So if we want to have more trainings, what are the steps to that? So who's going to look into the trainings? Who's going to plan the trainings? Like what who's going to be at the trainings, and then who is responsible, and what date do we want this done by? Um, this this can be really used for anything. I mean, we use this in transition plans, we use this in IEP goals, because a lot of times people are like, oh yes, I'll look into that. And then, the next meeting comes and they'll be like, oh yeah, I don't know. I kind of looked into it. It just didn't really work out. Um, which is not that's not like a good action step or plan. Woo! So we still finished a little early, which I'm happy because I really want us to go over that question. That was said a while ago. But thank you. As you see, Molly is pictured here, but she is not here today. Um, but this was our presentation. There's our QR code.
Yeah.
If you want to
We hope
email
you'll reach
me.
out to us if you have any questions or want to chat about this. As we said, this is our passion. Although I should practice talking about different things, this is where my heart is. So we're always happy to connect with you more.
This has been okay. What was the
And then
question?
we did include I included some UDL materials up further where someone
Okay.
had asked about that. So there are some attachments there.
Well, oh, for the person
Oh, go
who
ahead.
responded, Jen, being told no to the creative solutions,
Mm,
um, yeah, that we've never done it that way. I mean, it seems like maybe okay. It maybe you're like the steps that you're trying to make are too big for them and they're like not ready. Like to you, it feels like a small step, but to them, it feels like they're jumping off the diving board into the deep end at like 50 feet up high. Um, I think maybe like pulling back and trying to figure out where they would be comfortable at, and then like trying to do a little baby step from there. And just trying to like reassess what the barrier is for them. Because they're saying you've always done it that way. And we know like, yeah, things change. Like, is there like a video or like a resource or like something that could give them some more information, or something that you could be like, what can I do that would help this feel more comfortable? Because like this is my goal. Um, so I want to,
yeah, I think.
yeah,
Oh,
no, go
I'm also
ahead.
thinking too, because like I would be fiercely advocating for all the things that you mentioned, that adaptive curriculum, the digital licenses, all of those things. And I feel like working on multiple things at once can also be a barrier to people. Um, so yeah, thinking about what is the first piece that is important to get done. And also, with the adapted curriculum too, I know it's hard. It depends, there's always the conversation about who's adapting it and all of those things. Is it my job? Is it your job? But I think, modeling what adapted curriculum looks like, if that hasn't been done by creating adapted resources for a whole unit, or something like that, that's both, more than a PD of giving that overview, but also, is tangible and useful and can be applied directly. Um,
And I do want
that
to
could
say
also be
you're
helpful.
doing the
Mhm.
right fight. Like I am so on board for everything that you're doing. Um, but I do know that like when it's kind of like that parent when everyone's like, "Oh, here's that parent that's always asking for all those things," and it's like everyone already is so shut off that it's like now
Yeah.
nothing good is going to happen from it, which isn't okay. Like I'm not saying that like I am definitely not on this side, But as the one person trying to make the change that needs to happen, it definitely needs to come from a place where we can like collaboratively work together and they're not just like, great, here comes this person telling me I'm doing something else wrong, or we need to change this now and it's going to be hard. Like, we need to like get them on our side. See, this is where the cult thing comes in. Maybe I need to rethink this and put, how do we make inclusive cults into our culture?
Kayla's 2025 presentation.
Yes, if you guys ever see cults and inclusion, it's going to be from me, just to let you know.
I just I want to add one more thing because I'm recently thinking about this more too. What executive functioning barriers might a teacher have that prevent them from implementing something? Like, is it a mindset thing or is it something with the steps of actually implementing it that we can help them create workarounds for kind of figuring that out? Yeah.
Cool. It's
All right. Well, thank you
3:15.
all.
We did it.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming.